$10,000 sat in plain sight. The bills were crisp, banded, stacked in a neat rectangle on the armrest of the leather chair, the kind of money that did not belong in a place like this. Beside the cash, a gold watch caught the pale winter light, filtering through the cracked lobby windows of what had once been the Gaines Grand Hotel. The man in the chair had his eyes closed, his breathing slow and deliberate, his hands folded across his chest, like a man at peace with the world. Walter Gaines was not at peace. He was watching. Even behind closed lids, he was cataloging sounds: the shuffle of feet on the cold marble floor, the distant cough echoing from somewhere up the stairwell, the low moan of wind pressing through gaps in the boarded windows. 74 years old, and he still could not trust a room he could not read. His late wife, Margaret, had called it a gift. His lawyers called it a liability. His son, Derek, called it paranoia. Walter called it survival. He had built Gaines Properties from a single condemned warehouse on the east side of the city into one of the largest real estate firms in the state. Along the way, he had been stolen from by accountants, defrauded by contractors, and used as a fundraising prop by 3 separate nonprofit organizations whose directors had never once set foot in the communities they claimed to serve. He no longer believed in unconditional goodness. He believed in conditions. He believed in tests. This morning's test was simple. Derek had come to him 2 weeks ago with a report. Residents of the winter shelter were stealing construction materials from the secured floors above. Copper wire, pipe fittings, a portable generator that had gone missing from the service corridor on the 4th floor. Walter had read the report twice, set it down, and said nothing. He knew his son. Derek did not write reports out of concern. Derek wrote reports to build cases. So Walter had decided to see for himself. He had arrived at Gaines Grand just after 7 in the morning, before the shelter staff came on shift, before the social workers and the volunteers and the city inspectors who signed forms and left without looking at anything. He had found the old lobby chair, the one that had survived decades of renovations, because no one could agree on whether it was ugly or iconic, and he had sat down in it, placed the cash and the watch in full view, and closed his eyes. He had been sitting there for 40 minutes. 11 people had walked past. 3 had slowed. 2 had stopped entirely. None had touched the money. He heard new footsteps now, lighter, younger. Marcus Webb had been awake since 5:30. He had woken to the sound his father's breathing made when the oxygen was running low, a slight rasp on the exhale, almost imperceptible unless you had spent 2 years learning to hear it in your sleep. He had risen without turning on a light, found the spare canister by feel, and swapped it out in the dark. Raymond had stirred, but not woken. Marcus had pulled the blanket up over his father's shoulders, stood there for a moment in the cold listening to his breathing even out, and then walked to the window to watch the sky turn gray over the city. He was 19 years old, and he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He had enrolled in the electrical systems program at Eastview Community Technical College 2 years ago, had been, by his instructor's account, one of the sharpest students in the program. He understood circuits the way some people understood music, intuitively, structurally, in terms of flow and resistance, and what happened when the system was asked to carry more than it was built for. He had been 6 weeks from finishing his first certification when Raymond's condition had made it impossible to leave him alone for the 8 hours a day that school required. Marcus had not gone back. He did not talk about this. There was no version of the conversation that felt useful. People said things like, "You should apply for assistance," or "There are programs for that," and Marcus had spent enough time navigating those programs to know that the gap between what they promised and what they delivered was where people like his father disappeared. Raymond Webb had worked maintenance at Gaines Grand for 11 years. He had been good at his job, methodical, thorough, the kind of man who fixed things correctly the first time because he understood that the second time always cost more. He had filed his first written complaint about the mold in the East Wing ventilation system in the spring of his 4th year. He had filed 6 more over the following 7 years. Each one had been received, acknowledged, and buried. By his 10th year, Raymond was coughing through his shifts. By his 11th, he was on medical leave. By the time the hotel closed for redevelopment and the city converted it to a winter shelter, Raymond Webb was sleeping in a corner of the second-floor hallway of the building where he had spent the better part of a decade making sure other people's heat worked. Marcus carried this knowledge the way you carry something heavy, not dramatically, just constantly, with the permanent slight adjustment of posture that comes from a weight that never sets down. He was walking through the lobby on his way to the community kitchen when he saw the man in the chair. He saw the money first. That was impossible not to do. $10,000 on an armrest was not a thing you looked past. His steps slowed without a conscious decision. He was close enough now to see the watch gold, heavy, the kind that cost more than most people earned in a year. The man appeared to be asleep. Marcus stood still for 3 seconds. He thought about what he could do with $10,000. He thought about what Raymond's medical bills looked like. He thought about the oxygen canisters and the fact that the city's emergency shelter fund covered housing but not medical equipment, and that the gap between those two things was something he had been trying to bridge for 8 months. He did not touch the money. He was not built that way, not because he was incapable of wanting it, but because he had a specific and deeply held understanding of what it cost to become someone who took things that were not his. His mother had taught him that, in the years before she was gone, and the lesson had calcified into something structural, load-bearing, part of the architecture of who he was. He was turning to leave when his eyes dropped to the briefcase. It was open. Not carelessly, the latch was undone, the top pushed back at an angle, as if the man had been reading from it recently and set it aside. The top document was visible. Marcus was not trying to read it, but he had spent months studying building permits, zoning applications, and maintenance reports while trying to build a legal case for his father's lung damage, and his eyes recognized the format before his brain caught up with the content. It was a demolition order for Gaines Grand. He stepped closer, just slightly. The document was on official Gaines Properties letterhead. The language was standard. He had read enough of these to know, but there was something wrong with the inspection date. He could see it clearly. The number had been altered. What should have read as a scheduled repair and reinspection date had been changed by hand to an emergency demolition clearance dated for the second week of January, the coldest week of the year, with 63 residents currently sheltering inside. Marcus felt the blood leave his face. He stood very still for a long moment. The man in the chair did not move. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, took out his phone, and photographed every visible page of the document. His hands were steady. He had learned to keep them steady. He put the phone back in his pocket. He looked at the man one more time. Then he picked up the pen clipped to the briefcase handle, found the back of the cash envelope, and wrote 7 words. "You left exposed what needed protecting." He set the pen down and walked away. In the stairwell, he pulled up the contact for Naomi Price and sent her the photographs with a single line of text. They changed the inspection date. "This is the original order." Walter opened his eyes 2 minutes after Marcus left the lobby. He sat forward slowly, the way a man does when his back has been reminding him of his age for the past hour. He looked at the cash. He looked at the watch, both untouched. His eyes moved to the briefcase, and then to the envelope, and he picked it up and read the 7 words on the back. He sat with that for a long time. Then he closed the briefcase, stood up, and went to find out who had written it. He found out within the hour. A shelter staff member recognized Marcus from the description and pointed Walter toward the second floor. He found the young man sitting in the hallway outside a curtained space, reading from a folded piece of paper that turned out, on closer inspection, to be a page of hand-copied electrical code notation. Walter sat down on the floor across from him, which was not something his knees thanked him for. "You could have taken it," Walter said. Marcus looked at him. "I know. But you photographed my documents instead. Your documents had information that affects 63 people. The cash only affected me." Walter studied him. "That's a very composed answer for someone who just committed a federal offense." "I haven't committed anything. I documented evidence of a falsified public safety record." Marcus folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "If you want to argue about that, I'll give you Naomi Price's number." Walter almost smiled. He did not. "How did you know what you were looking at?" "I've read about 40 demolition orders in the past 8 months. I was building a case for my father." A pause. "He worked here, in maintenance, for 11 years. Walter was quiet for a moment. Raymond Webb. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, not surprise exactly, more like the careful recalibration of someone who has just learned the terrain is different than expected. You know his name. I saw the maintenance logs when we were preparing the redevelopment filings. Walter looked at his hands. The complaints were in there. All 7 of them. Then you know they were ignored. I know they were filed. He looked up. I did not know, until this morning, what happened to them after that. Walter found Raymond that afternoon. Raymond Webb was lying on a cot near the second-floor window, propped up slightly, a thin blanket pulled to his chest, and an oxygen cannula looped around his ears. He had the measured stillness of a man who had learned to conserve everything: breath, movement, trust. Walter pulled a folding chair over and sat down without asking permission. Raymond watched him with the expression of a man who has dealt with people in suits for too long. I'm not here to offer you anything, Walter said. I just want to understand what happened. Raymond looked at him for a long moment. Then he began to talk. He talked slowly, in the specific language of a man who had spent his working life documenting things precisely. He described the first time he had noticed the mold, the discoloration on the east wing ductwork, the smell that came through the vents on humid days, the way his chest felt different after a long shift in that corridor. He described the forms he had filled out, the supervisors he had spoken to, the phone calls that went unreturned. He described the morning he found his own reports filed under a category labeled non-urgent aesthetic concerns. He described the year his breathing changed. Walter listened to all of it without speaking. By the time Raymond finished, the light through the window had gone from pale gray to the deeper gray of late afternoon, and Walter understood something he had not understood when he walked in. This had not been negligence. Negligence was careless. What Raymond was describing was a decision made repeatedly, at multiple levels of management, over the course of years. Someone had looked at those reports and chosen to do nothing because doing something cost money that was better spent elsewhere. He thought about Derek's signature on the redevelopment timeline. He thought about the altered date on the demolition order. He thought about the 7 words Marcus Webb had written on the back of an envelope containing $10,000 that the young man had not touched. Walter did not say any of this to Raymond. He thanked him and stood up, and Raymond nodded once, the same small nod. Walter realized later that Marcus had described seeing his father give him that morning when he covered him with the blanket in the dark. The offer came the next morning. Walter found Marcus in the community kitchen before the breakfast shift started, sitting alone at the end of a long folding table with a cup of coffee gone cold in front of him. Walter sat down across from him and placed an envelope on the table thicker than the one from yesterday. And this time, it did not have anything written on the back. There is a furnished apartment on Clement Street, Walter said. 2 bedrooms, ground floor, so your father won't have to manage stairs. Paid for 12 months in advance. He set a second document beside the envelope, and enough to cover his medical equipment and ongoing care for the same period. After that, we can discuss a longer arrangement. Marcus looked at the envelope. He looked at the document. He looked at Walter. In exchange for what? He said. It was not a question. The photographs. And your silence regarding the contents of the document you saw. Marcus picked up the coffee cup, realized it was cold, and set it back down. My father filed 7 complaints over 7 years. People signed off on ignoring every one of them. He worked in that building until his lungs gave out, and then the building got converted into a place for him to sleep while it waits to be torn down. He paused. You're asking me to let that be the end of the story. I'm asking you to protect your father. You're asking me to protect your company. Marcus stood up. Those aren't the same thing, Mr. Gaines. He walked out of the kitchen. Walter sat at the table for a while, looking at the envelope. It was the second time in 2 days that Marcus Webb had declined $10,000. Walter found, to his own surprise, that this did not make him angry. It made him want to understand the young man in a way he had not wanted to understand someone in a very long time. Naomi Price filed for a temporary restraining order on a Thursday, citing the photographic evidence of the altered demolition order. She was in court by Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, a judge had granted a 10-day hold on all demolition activity at Gaines Grand pending independent structural review. By Friday evening, The story was on 3 local news channels and 1 national outlet. Walter watched the coverage from his office on the 31st floor of the Gaines Properties headquarters building. The crawler at the bottom of the screen read, "Billionaire's company accused of falsifying safety documents at homeless shelter." His publicist called 4 times. His general counsel called twice. His board liaison called once and spoke for 11 minutes without pausing for a response. Walter issued a statement promising a full independent inspection and hung up on the next 6 calls. Derek arrived at the office at 9 that evening without knocking. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered and precise in the way of someone who had spent his entire adult life trying to demonstrate competence to a father who kept raising the standard. He sat down across from Walter's desk and folded his hands on the surface exactly the way Walter did, which was something Walter had noticed years ago and never mentioned. "The bank called," Derek said. "If the demolition timeline slips past the end of the month, they revisit the loan terms. If the terms change, we lose the favorable rate. If we lose the rate, the carrying cost on the Clement Street Tower project goes up by approximately $4 million per quarter." He let that land. "If we lose the project entirely, we're looking at a liquidity event that affects every active development in our portfolio." "How many employees?" Walter said. "Across all active projects, roughly 2,400. Subcontractors and suppliers, another 800. Walter was quiet. "There are 63 people in that building, Dad. We can relocate every one of them to better facilities within 48 hours. The city has overflow capacity at 2 locations. I've already spoken to the shelter coordinator." Derek's voice was level, managerial, stripped of everything that might sound like feeling. "This is not a complicated equation." "It wasn't complicated when Raymond Webb filed his first report either," Walter said. "Someone did that math and came up with the same answer." Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That is a separate issue, and you know it." "Is it?" "The ventilation complaints were reviewed by facilities management. The determination was made that the conditions did not meet the threshold for emergency remediation. That determination was documented and signed off at the appropriate level." "Your level," Walter said. The silence in the room was the kind that exists between 2 people who have had a version of this conversation before and both know how it ends. "I made decisions that were consistent with the information I had at the time," Derek said. "That is what management is." Walter looked at his son for a long moment. He saw the tightness around the eyes, the slight forward lean, the controlled breathing of a man who had prepared for this conversation and was executing his preparation correctly. He had taught Derek all of those things. He was not sure, sitting there, when he had stopped teaching him the other things. "I'll think about it," Walter said. Derek left without saying good night. The independent inspection was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It did not happen. On Monday morning, the forensic analysis firm Derek had retained released its findings. The metadata embedded in Marcus's photographs indicated the images had been modified after capture. The timestamp discrepancies were presented in a 12-page technical report with charts and a 1-paragraph executive summary that read clearly enough for a news anchor to cite verbatim. By Monday afternoon, every outlet that had run the original story was running the correction. The security footage from the lobby was released the same day. 40 seconds of Marcus Webb standing beside Walter's open briefcase, close enough to read the documents, long enough to photograph them. The footage had no audio. It showed exactly what Derek needed it to show, and nothing else. Marcus watched the coverage on someone's borrowed phone in the second-floor hallway of Gaines Grand and felt the cold that has nothing to do with temperature. He had known this was possible. He had told himself he was prepared for it. He understood now the difference between knowing a thing and experiencing it. Naomi called him at 4 in the afternoon. "I have to withdraw the motion," she said. "I'm sorry, Marcus. Without the original document to verify against, the photographs aren't sufficient to maintain the hold. Their forensic report creates enough reasonable doubt that the judge isn't going to sustain the restraining order on this evidence alone." "What about Raymond's testimony? What about the maintenance complaints?" "The complaints are part of a separate civil matter. They don't bear on the immediate question of whether the demolition order was falsified. And Raymond's testimony about what he filed years ago doesn't address the metadata issue with your photographs. A pause. Derek Gaines's legal team is also filing a complaint against you personally for unauthorized access to proprietary documents. Marcus sat with the phone against his ear and looked at his father sleeping across the hallway. "Is there anything else?" he said. "There is one thing," Naomi said. "Raymond mentioned to me last week that he kept personal records during his maintenance years. Detailed ones. If those records exist and contain what he described, they would constitute independent corroboration that predates any digital manipulation. Original handwritten documents cannot have their metadata altered." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He kept a logbook. "It's in the mechanical room in the basement. He left it there when he went on medical leave because he thought he was going back. If that logbook exists, and you can retrieve it before the demolition proceeds." "When is the hold lifted?" "End of business Wednesday. Demolition starts Thursday morning, 7 in the morning. Marcus looked at the ceiling. "I'll figure it out," he said, and ended the call. He told Raymond that evening. Raymond listened without interrupting, which was his way. When Marcus finished, Raymond was quiet for a moment, then said, "The mechanical room is in the sub-basement. Level 2, underground. The door code was 4 digits, the last 4 digits of the hotel's original opening year. I don't know if they changed it when they converted the building. Do you remember the layout? Better than whoever drew the original blueprints." Raymond shifted on the cot and looked at his son carefully. "You're going in Wednesday night. After the shelter staff leaves for the night. I'm going with you." Marcus started to object. Raymond held up one hand, not a commanding gesture, just a quiet stopping one, the kind that costs nothing and means everything. "I know every inch of that basement," Raymond said. "In the dark, with the power cut, with water on the floor because there will be water, the sump pump runs on the main circuit. You will not find that room without me. You know it." Marcus looked at his father, at the oxygen cannula, at the way Raymond's chest moved when he breathed, the slight extra effort visible even at rest. "If anything happens to you down there, if we don't get that logbook," Raymond said, "they tear this building down Thursday morning and 63 people spend the rest of winter in an overflow facility with shared bathrooms and no kitchen access. Some of them are going to get sick. Some of them are already sick." He paused to breathe. "I worked in that building for 11 years. I documented everything they did wrong because I thought someday someone would look at it. I need to be the one who goes to get it." Marcus did not argue further. He had learned, over 2 years of being his father's primary caretaker, to distinguish between the moments when Raymond needed to be protected and the moments when Raymond needed to be allowed to do something that mattered. This was the second kind. They went in at 11 Wednesday night. The shelter officially closed its doors to outside entry at 9. By 10, most residents were settled. By 11, the building had the specific quiet of a large space full of people trying to sleep in difficult circumstances, not silence, but the layered ambient sound of collective rest, coughing, the occasional murmur, the settling of an old building in winter cold. Marcus had spent the afternoon identifying the least observed entry point, a service door on the north side that connected to the maintenance corridor. The lock was a standard pin tumbler, and he had been picking locks since he was 14 because his mother had lost her keys frequently and locksmiths cost money. He was inside in under 2 minutes. Raymond moved slowly but surely, one hand on the corridor wall, the portable oxygen concentrator smaller than the stationary unit, enough for 3 hours hanging from a strap on Marcus's shoulder. They descended the stairwell to the first underground level, then found the secondary stair to the second underground level. The sub-basement was cold in a way that was distinct from the upper floors. Not the ambient cold of inadequate heating, but the cold of underground spaces, damp and still and absolute. Raymond navigated from memory, one hand trailing the wall, calling out turns quietly, left at the junction, straight past the electrical panels, door, at the end of the corridor. They found the mechanical room door 14 minutes after entering the building. The code pad was dark. Raymond entered the 4 digits. The lock clicked open. The room smelled of rust and standing water. Marcus swept his phone flashlight across the space. 2 large boilers, a tangle of pipe infrastructure, a workbench along the far wall with tools still laid out on it as if someone had stepped away for lunch and never come back. On the shelf above the workbench, between a box of replacement fittings and a stack of folded technical diagrams, was a water-stained composition notebook with maintenance log, R. Webb, written on the cover in black marker. Raymond crossed the room and picked it up. He held it for a moment, without opening it. The way you hold something that cost you a great deal. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker, a complete, instantaneous cut. Every indicator light, every standby glow, every faint illumination from any source in the building, gone at once. In the sub-basement, the darkness was total. Marcus turned on his phone flashlight. Power cut, he said. The whole building? Has to be. That's a main breaker cut, not a fuse. He was already moving toward the electrical panel on the wall, reading it by flashlight. Someone did this deliberately. The demolition crew doesn't come until tomorrow morning. Raymond said nothing for a moment. Then, Derek. Marcus looked at his father. Raymond was breathing harder than he had been. The stress, the cold, the exertion, all of it compounding. The portable concentrator was working, but it was not as effective as the stationary unit. "We need to get out," Marcus said. "The stairwell door is on the electromagnetic lock system," Raymond said. "If the power is cut, it defaults to locked or unlocked?" Locked. Security protocol for the mechanical spaces. Marcus was already at the door. He tried it. Locked. He stood for 3 seconds doing the calculation, the door gauge, the lock type, the space between frame and door, what he had in his pockets. He had a multi-tool. He had wire from the electrical pouch he carried out of habit. He had knowledge. He got to work. Behind him, he heard his father's breathing change, the rasp on the exhale becoming more pronounced, each breath requiring slightly more visible effort. He heard Raymond sit down on the floor, back against the workbench, the logbook held against his chest. "Marcus," Raymond said. "I'm working. I know. I'm just saying your name." A pause, and then quietly, "I'm glad you came." Marcus kept his hands moving. He did not trust his voice, so he said nothing. But he worked faster. The water came 10 minutes later, a pipe somewhere in the wall, stressed by the cold, without the heating system running, giving way. It came in slowly at first, a seep darkening the floor along the base of the far wall, and then faster, spreading across the uneven concrete toward them. Marcus looked at the water moving toward his father's legs and made a decision. The emergency lighting circuit, he knew from his training, ran on a separate battery backup that was not connected to the main breaker. It was designed to be independent precisely for situations like this. The panel for it was somewhere in this room. Building code required a secondary override inside all mechanical spaces, a failsafe that maintenance staff were often the only ones who knew about. "Upper left panel," Raymond said from the floor. His voice was steady even as his breathing was not. "Red toggle. 3rd row." Marcus turned the flashlight to the panel. Found the toggle. Threw it. Emergency lighting came on throughout the sub-basement, dim, orange-tinted, but enough. Enough to see by. Enough for the electromagnetic locks to register the safety override and release. The door clicked open. 40 miles away, in his car in the parking structure beneath Gaines Properties headquarters, Walter Gaines was sitting with his phone in his hand and the signed demolition authorization on the seat beside him when his phone rang. The number was one he recognized. Henry Alcott, the building's overnight security contractor, a man who had worked Gaines Properties for 22 years and whom Walter had personally hired after the previous firm had submitted fraudulent shift logs. Walter answered. "Mr. Gaines," Henry said, "I need you to know something. There are 2 people inside the building. I watched them go in around 11. One of them is the Webb kid. The other one is older, moving slow, on oxygen." A pause. "Mr. Derek called me at 10:15 and told me to cut the main power at 11:30. He told me to log it as a routine pre-demolition systems check." Another pause. "I didn't feel right about it. I looked at the camera feeds before I cut it. I saw them go in." Walter's hand tightened on the phone. "They're in the sub-basement," Henry said. "I don't know if the emergency lighting came on. I don't know if the stairwell locks released." Walter looked at the demolition authorization on the seat beside him. He looked at his own signature at the bottom of the page. He started the car. He drove faster than he had driven in 20 years. The city at midnight had the openness of late hours, traffic lights cycling through their sequences for no one, storefronts dark behind their gates. Walter ran 2 yellow lights and did not think about it. He was thinking about a signed piece of paper on his passenger seat and what it meant that his name was at the bottom of it. He had built things his entire life: hotels, office towers, mixed-use developments that transformed vacant blocks into functioning neighborhoods. He had the architectural renderings framed in his office, the before and after photographs in the lobby, the commemorative plaques in buildings that bore his name. He had believed, for most of his adult life, that the buildings were the point. Margaret had told him otherwise. She had said it once, toward the end, when the illness had stripped away the patience she had always used to cushion her honesty. "Walter, do not let the company become the only thing left of you." He had held her hand and told her it would not. He was not sure, driving through the dark city, that he had kept that promise. He called Naomi Price from the car. She answered on the second ring. He told her what Henry had told him. He told her he was on his way to the building. He told her he was prepared to provide the internal access codes that would document Derek's authorization of the power cut. Naomi was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "If you provide that, and if it shows what you're describing, you understand what happens to the company." "Yes." "And to Derek." "Yes." Another pause. "I'll meet you there." Marcus got Raymond up the stairwell, 1 floor at a time. Raymond was breathing hard but deliberately, the way a man breathes when he knows his body is struggling and has decided to manage the struggle rather than panic about it. He kept 1 hand on the wall and 1 hand on Marcus's arm, and he did not ask to stop, and Marcus did not offer to. They had always had an understanding, the 2 of them, about when to push and when to yield. The silent negotiation of 2 people who had been each other's primary support for long enough that the communication had gone mostly nonverbal. The logbook was inside Marcus's jacket, against his chest. They came up from the first underground level stairwell into the main corridor of the ground floor, and Marcus stopped. The emergency lighting was on throughout the building. The same override had cascaded through the safety system, triggering the battery-powered corridor lights on every floor. In the orange-tinted dimness, Marcus could see the lobby at the end of the corridor. He could also see 3 people standing in the lobby: Walter Gaines, Naomi Price, and behind them, moving through the service entrance with a medical kit and a portable resuscitation unit, 2 paramedics. Marcus stood in the corridor and looked at Walter Gaines across the length of the lobby floor. Walter looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Raymond coughed a deep, rattling cough that bent him forward, and Marcus had his arm around his father's shoulders and was moving toward the paramedics, and the moment dissolved into the organized urgency of people who know what to do and are doing it. The paramedics stabilized Raymond in the lobby. His oxygen saturation had dropped during the time in the sub-basement, not to a critical level, but low enough to require supplemental support. One of the paramedics put a non-rebreather mask on him and told him to breathe slowly and not talk for a few minutes. Raymond complied. He kept his eyes on Marcus the entire time. Naomi stood to one side, on her phone, speaking in the clipped, efficient cadence of someone building a legal structure in real time. Walter stood near the lobby door and did not look at his phone, which was showing 17 missed calls from Derek. Marcus came to stand beside him after the paramedics had Raymond comfortable. "You came," Marcus said. "Henry called me." "I know, but you came." Walter looked at the lobby, the old marble floors, the cracked ceiling plasterwork, the boarded windows, the leather chair still sitting in the center of the space where he had left it 2 days ago. He had sat in that chair and believed he was testing other people. He had been wrong about what was being tested. "Your father kept the logbook," Walter said. 11 years of it. Marcus reached into his jacket and took it out. It was warped from the damp, the cover buckling, but intact. Every complaint, every date, every name. He paused, including Derek's. Walter nodded slowly. "What happens now is going to cost you a great deal," Marcus said. It was not a warning. It was a statement of fact, offered without satisfaction or apology. "I know. The company might not survive it. I know that too." Marcus looked at him carefully. "Why did you sign the demolition order?" Walter was quiet for a moment. It was a fair question, and it deserved a fair answer. Because Derek told me 2,400 people would lose their jobs if I did not, and I believed that the math was the math. I believed the equation. He paused. I signed it before I understood that the equation had been constructed by the same person who built the problem it was solving. And now I am here. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then, he handed Walter the logbook. Walter took it, surprised. You will need it for the investigation, Marcus said. I do not need to hold it. I just needed to find it. He turned and walked back to where his father was lying, and sat down on the floor beside the cot, and put his hand over Raymond's. Walter held the press conference at 10 o'clock the following morning. He did not use the prepared statement his communications team had drafted. He folded it once and put it in his jacket pocket and did not take it out. He stood at the podium in the lobby of Gaines Properties headquarters and spoke without notes. He said that Gaines Properties had failed in its obligations to the residents and former employees of Gaines Grand. He said the failure was not accidental. He said the demolition timeline had been manipulated for financial reasons, that safety documentation had been altered, and that the alteration had been authorized at the executive level. He said he was providing the city attorney's office, the state building authority, and the Federal Labor Safety Commission with complete access to all internal communications, financial records, and project files related to Gaines Grand, without conditions and without requesting immunity protections for any individual. He said that his son Derek Gaines had authorized the power cutoff to the building on the night it occurred, with knowledge that occupants were inside, and that this authorization was documented in the company's internal system. Then he stopped speaking and answered questions for 40 minutes. The bank called during the press conference. Walter did not take the call. His general counsel, standing to his left, listened for 90 seconds and quietly confirmed what they already knew. The construction loan for the Clement Street Tower project was suspended pending review of the criminal allegations. The project was effectively over. Walter finished the press conference and went back to his office and sat at his desk for a while in the quiet. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows facing east. On clear days, you could see all the way to the edge of the city, the older neighborhoods giving way to the newer ones, the skyline a record of decisions made over decades about what to build and where and for whom. Walter had always found the view clarifying. He found it clarifying now, though not in the way he was accustomed to. The consequences arranged themselves over the following weeks with the implacable logic of what happens when the weight-bearing structures of a thing are finally examined honestly. Derek Gaines was indicted on 3 counts: falsification of public safety records, obstruction of a regulatory investigation, and reckless endangerment. He retained counsel and made no public statement. Henry Alcott, whose call had set the rescue in motion, was formally recognized as a protected whistleblower under state statute. Walter made certain of it personally before anything else was settled. The construction loan was formally canceled. 2 active development projects were suspended. Walter sold 4 commercial properties to cover the initial tranche of settlement payments to former employees and residents with documented health claims. Raymond Webb's case was among the first to be evaluated. His attorneys submitted 11 years of logbook documentation, a medical history, and testimony from 3 other former maintenance employees who had experienced similar respiratory conditions. Walter turned the logbook over to Raymond's legal team the morning after the press conference, without conditions and without request for acknowledgement. He did not contest a single claim. Gaines Properties, in its existing form, did not survive. The board voted to restructure, and Walter did not fight the vote. He retained a minority interest in 2 smaller projects and stepped back from executive control of everything else. He was, by most financial measures, a significantly diminished version of what he had been 6 months earlier. He found he minded this less than he expected. Raymond Webb was discharged from the hospital on a Tuesday in late February. His lungs had sustained damage that was permanent. The scar tissue did not resolve, the capacity did not return, and he would require supplemental oxygen for the rest of his life and could not return to any kind of physical labor. These were facts he had known for some time, and he received them from his doctor with the equanimity of a man who has already done his accounting and arrived at peace with the balance. What he had not expected was the apartment. It was on the ground floor of a building in the Eastview neighborhood, 2 bedrooms. good light, a small courtyard accessible through the sliding door in the living room. It had been arranged through the community settlement fund that Naomi's office had established using the initial blight remediation payments. Marcus had toured it twice before telling his father about it, checking the ceiling heights, the door widths, the placement of electrical outlets relative to where a stationary oxygen concentrator would need to sit. Raymond stood in the doorway for a long moment before going inside. He looked at the courtyard. He looked at the light. "How did you get ground floor?" he asked. "I asked," Marcus said. Raymond went inside. Marcus stood in the doorway and watched him. It was the first time in 2 years he had watched his father walk into a home. Marcus re-enrolled at Eastview Community Technical College in March in the Electrical Systems and Building Safety program. His instructor from 2 years earlier was still there. The man looked at Marcus's transcript, looked at Marcus, and said, "You want to start where you left off, or do you want to go back to the beginning?" "Where I left off," Marcus said. "Good answer." The settlement fund had been structured, at Marcus's specific request, to include 3 components beyond individual compensation: a transitional housing program for the 63 former Gaines Grand residents, a vocational training scholarship fund accessible to shelter residents citywide, and a legal aid partnership with Naomi's office, providing ongoing representation to people facing housing insecurity. Marcus had spent 4 days with Naomi drafting the terms. He had not taken a dollar of personal compensation. When Naomi asked him why, he said, "Because money fixes what happened to us specifically. The other thing fixes what happens to people like us generally. The second one is harder and takes longer, and I would rather do the harder thing." Naomi had looked at him over the top of her reading glasses for a moment, and then gone back to the draft without comment. This was, Marcus had learned, her version of high praise. Gaines Grand was transferred to the Eastview Community Land Trust in April, under the terms of the settlement agreement. The architectural firm hired to design the renovation did their initial walkthrough in May. Their report concluded that the building's structural core was sound, that the mold damage was extensive but remediable, and that the east wing ventilation system could be entirely replaced for a fraction of what the original maintenance repairs would have cost. In the first year, Raymond Webb had flagged the problem. Marcus read the report in full. He filed it without comment. The reopening ceremony was held on a Saturday morning in early January, 1 year and 3 days after the night Marcus and Raymond had gone into the sub-basement. The building had been renamed. The sign above the main entrance read, "The Eastview Center for Housing and Trades," in clean letters, no corporate branding, no donor plaques. The lobby had been stripped back to its original materials, the marble floors refinished, the plasterwork restored, the tall windows unboarded and filled with new glass that let in the full gray winter light. There was a small ceremony in the lobby. A city councilwoman spoke. Naomi spoke. Raymond Webb, seated in the front row with his oxygen concentrator beside him, was introduced and received a standing ovation that he acknowledged with a single nod and an expression that suggested he found the whole thing slightly excessive, but was willing to tolerate it. Marcus did not speak. He had been asked and had declined. He stood near the back of the room and watched, which was where he was most comfortable. He saw Walter Gaines come in through the side entrance about 10 minutes into the ceremony. Walter was alone. No security, no assistant, no entourage of any kind. He was wearing a dark wool coat that had seen better years, and he stood near the back of the room on the opposite side from Marcus, watching the proceedings with an expression that was difficult to read, not quite grief, not quite relief, something more honest than either. After the ceremony, when the crowd had shifted into the reception area and the lobby had thinned, Marcus crossed to where Walter was standing. They stood side by side for a moment, looking at the restored lobby. "You came," Marcus said. "You said I could. I did not say you could not." "That is what I mean," Walter said. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out an envelope. It was old, slightly worn at the corners, the paper softened from having been handled and refolded many times. He held it out. Walter took it. He recognized it immediately. The same envelope, the same slight heft. He turned it over. On the back, in the same handwriting as before, the same 7 words. "You left exposed what needed protecting." He stood holding it for a long moment. Then he opened the flap and looked inside. It was empty. Not the $10,000 he had not expected that. Not a letter, not a document, just the envelope, empty, with those 7 words on the back. He understood. The money had never been the thing. The documents had never been the thing. What Marcus had been telling him from the first moment, what he had been trying to say with every decision he had made through all of it. The refusal, the photographs, the logbook, the settlement terms, all of it was that some things do not have a cash equivalent. Some things can only be protected by the choice to protect them, made in the moment when the cost of that choice is highest and the pressure not to make it is at its most persuasive. Walter had built an empire by understanding value. He had spent 74 years believing he was good at it. He was beginning to understand that he had been measuring the wrong things. He folded the envelope carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his coat. He would keep it, not as a reminder of what he had lost. He had lost enough and knew it clearly, but as a reminder of what the young man standing beside him had taught him. In the coldest week of the year, in a building Walter had put his name on without reading what was inside it. "What do you want to be?" Walter said. "When you finish the program." Marcus looked at the restored lobby, the light, the marble, the high windows letting in the winter sky. "A building safety inspector," he said. "I want to be the person who reads the reports and makes sure they do not disappear." Walter nodded slowly. They stood in the lobby of the Eastview Center for Housing and Trades for a while longer. 2 men who had arrived at this place by very different roads and understood it, perhaps, for the first time in something close to the same way. Outside, the January sky was the pale gray of winter mornings in this city, cold, clear, honest. It was a good day to begin.